Hi guys, I'm Mike and this is F1 Fanatics. Welcome back to another F1 Worldwide, the fan podcast, and joining me today we have Anthony. Now Anthony contacted me on Twitter and we've kind of shared a few exchanges on there, and yes, he's a fan of F1 and wanted to come on the podcast, and as it is the fan podcast, we were more than happy for him to come on. So Anthony, welcome to the podcast.
Hello everyone, good to be here today. Thank you for having me on. Looking forward to talking F1.
Absolutely, and we usually tend to find a topic, but today's topic is really interesting because it's essentially the future F1, and we are recording this the week where, it's the Thursday before it should have been the Bahrain Grand Prix, so it hasn't officially been announced, but we imagine it will be. But basically today we were going to talk about 2021 and the impact those new rules are going to have on the sports and kind of discuss everything about that in a little bit more detail. But the curveball to that question now is the fact that those rules might be pushed back a year because of the season being affected by the coronavirus to 2022. So we have plenty to discuss about on this topic. But first of all, what we'll discuss, we'll assume that it is going to take place in 2021, then we'll speculate what they mean. But basically, how do you think the rules in 2021 are going to improve F1, Anthony? I realise that's a big question to start off with.
Hopefully for the better. We've been told, I think really since October last year, it's going to be better racing. Cars are going to be able to follow each other much more closely. We're going to have hopefully a closer field with the cost cap we're going to have. That's going to hopefully provide more sustainability for the future, maybe encourage a few new teams further down the line, probably not for 2021, but maybe we're talking 2023, 2024 if it becomes an attractive option. But I think really the whole main idea of this regulation change is to stop the big three teams, the big boys, spending dozens and hundreds and thousands of their money and bring the field closer together so you can there's not so much predictability and everyone can say, oh, it's going to be a Mercedes or a Ferrari or a Red Bull winning the championship or a race this year. You've got maybe the likes of Renault, possibly McLaren, Aston Martin if that project comes well, and even some of the smaller teams like Williams and AlphaTauri or AlphaTauri, however you say it. I'm not sure how you say that, but just bring the field together, get closer racing, and make the sport more exciting and unpredictable. I think that's really what F1's aiming for with 2021.
Yeah, it's absolutely, and it's exciting because it is certainly the biggest overhaul in the rules probably since the impact of when the hybrid engines came in 2014. So it has been a good few years coming, and it is really exciting in that aspect of we don't know what to expect, but a few of the things you mentioned, obviously cars following it easier. I think they said they get a reduction in about 50% of their downforce at the moment when the top cars follow each other, and the stats that they did with their testing was around 10%. So that's an absolutely huge kind of difference to make in terms of hopefully making racing a lot easier and better to kind of go on that front. And I think probably out of the rules, the most interesting thing for me is the more going back to ground effect, and obviously the aero side of the things being more kind of subscribed on the top of the car, but underneath the car, that's where the teams and the kind of aero geniuses like Adrian Newey are going to kind of have their fun. So what do you think about obviously ground effect playing more of a big part in F1 again, Anthony?
I think it's really good. I think it's good to have ground effects coming back. I know a lot of people have been wanting ground effects to return since they were, you could say, banned or not allowed in the sport. But I think the good thing about these ground effects, I believe there's a new system for 2021. The show it might be 2022. What happens with the rule change and what's going on right now with COVID-19? But obviously, I believe there's a new CAD system where all the teams have to share their new. I'm not sure if it applies to ground systems. I think it does. Don't take my word gospel on that, but it's really interesting because with this CAD system they have to show the other teams what they've done, not obviously tell them how they've done it, but show them what they've done. And what that's going to do is it's going to give the teams more of an equal playing field. You could say perhaps, for example, let's say Ferrari get the ground effect right and maybe Renault get the ground effect wrong. That's going to give Renault a chance to look at Ferrari's ground effect and think, right, where did we get this wrong? How are we going to fix this? And they can change the underside of the car and whatnot, and that's going to hopefully give even closer and better racing in the future.
Yeah, fingers crossed. And that is kind of the main key theme there in the kind of 2021 rules, isn't it? It's we want closer racing and we want a more even playing field. F1 historically, it has tended to have teams that dominate, but I suppose if you go back to the 50s, 60s and 70s, well, one, because of reliability, but it wasn't necessarily teams dominating for like 4, 5, 6 year stints, wasn't it? McLaren were probably the first team to do that really in the kind of late 80s. Obviously some teams had done it on constructors fronts, but yeah, it would really be nice to kind of have maybe 3, 4, 5 different constructors and drivers winning the title in the next decade. That would be something I think really exciting for F1.
Wouldn't it be great if we had all 10? That would be great.
That would be absolutely amazing.
I don't think 10's realistic. Obviously 4 or 5 we're probably looking at Mercedes, Ferrari and Red Bull still being near the front, but hopefully Renault can close that gap, McLaren can bridge a bit of that gap as well. Aston Martin, we don't know what's happening there. They could spring a surprise, who knows? I know Sergio Perez is an excellent talent and he deserves a shot at the top, so it'd be good to see Aston Martin get it right. Williams, it's difficult to say with them. That you could say they might just write off this season and put everything to 2021, but obviously it would be great to have 5, 6 teams who are often fighting for wins, podiums, and you just don't know who's going to win each race, because at the moment you could sort of say at most tracks, if a Mercedes is on pole, you'll probably think, oh yeah, Mercedes have got this race, or maybe Verstappen in 3rd or Vettel in 4th or whatever. But if you have that close 5, 6 car grid at the top or whatever, from pretty much 1st to 12th, you could say any of those 12 could win.
Exactly, and that's it. So I think realistically, it's 5, potentially 6 constructors are the most exciting. Alfa Romeo and Alfa Tauri with their links to Red Bull and Ferrari respectively, you think it's unlikely, unless obviously Alfa Romeo go more the Sauber route again, for them to kind of push forward. But McLaren, Racing Point going into Aston Martin and Renault, you all think that they probably have the resources with the new budget cap to be able to get a lot closer to where they are with Mercedes, Ferrari and Red Bull right now, and just mixing up more podiums and mixing up more kind of races would just be absolutely fantastic for F1 and just for us fans watching, like you said, getting that unpredictable element coming into things. I think
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly, and I think we've mainly thought about the positives here in terms of, but there probably is the main negatives. You spoke about the budget cap there. It's at 175 million, but not included in that budget cap is the driver salaries and the top 3 personnel in the team. So what do you think might that effect have on the sport? Do you think the budget cap will be effective, or whether that will be a way around the top teams still finding a way to dominate?
I think personally that 175 million cost cap has been put to performance, and non-performance, which includes driver salaries, your workforce salaries, top 3 personnel in the team, all that sort of thing, is not included in the cost cap. And I think for the short term, that's going to be good, because it's not going to mean teams like, obviously Mercedes. Lewis Hamilton costs about 45 million a year, I believe. He got a salary of about 44 million last year or whatever, so he costs about 45 million a year. And you got to say 175 million minus 45 million, that's 130 million left in the bank just from having Lewis Hamilton. So I think for the short term it's very good, but there will, I believe, reach a point where teams like Mercedes, Ferrari, Red Bull, they've got so much money, they're going to hire the absolute geniuses like Adrian Newey, obviously, all those sort of people. And that will give them that slight edge. But I think there will reach a point where the sport will see, okay, we've got closer racing and the budget cap is starting to be exploited a bit here in a way, not like in terms of law, like everyone's remaining within the $175 million cost cap, but they're getting the best people to make sure they have that advantage. We might move some of the stuff in the non-performance into the performance category, into the cost cap, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely, and it is the only real worry for me in that cost cap. But at the same stage, drivers tend to go where the best car is. There isn't really they don't usually tend to, unless it's Ferrari, because of the name that Ferrari, you kind of, obviously you saw Sebastian Vettel go when he was on top with Red Bull, and obviously that season with Ricciardo, it was maybe saying that Red Bull were on the decline, but Ferrari, Schumacher moving to Ferrari there, historically guys have left maybe Ferrari for that, but most of the time, even at Ferrari, people tend to leave and go to the place where the best car is. And you can pay all the top guys in the sport to do it, but also it expresses young talent to come in, guys who haven't quite got it right. The Racing Point team, Force India, in their kind of main ones, they've been a massive team, overachieving their means for so long, and you just kind of feel like they're a team that would really excel in these sort of conditions, don't you?
I think so. They've now got... They know they're stable now with Lawrence Stroll's consortium coming in and taking the team out of administration, which was obviously put into administration in order to save the team by Sergio Perez, and the consortium itself to save all the jobs and make sure the car was there for the future. And with those resources in place now, last year was really more of a transition year. We were all talking about how exciting Racing Point were going to be at the start of this season. Maybe they've even bridged the gap so much to the top three, they might be able to challenge Ferrari on occasion this year. We were talking about, obviously, we don't know if that's true at the moment. We might find out at the start of the season, depending on how much development happens, or if we predict the order would change before we reach the first race, wherever that may be at this point. But it was so good knowing we could talk about Racing Points in such a good light, thinking, are they not going to be here come mid-season, or where are they going to be if they're at the field? If they're at the rear of the field, could we say goodbye to Racing Point or whatever? It's so good now. We know with Racing Point they can achieve what they deserve, really.
Absolutely, and I think now with Aston Martin's backing as well, I think they will start to garner the support that really their kind of personnel and their drivers that they've had kind of, deserve. They for me have been an unsung hero. Traditionally McLaren, they've really built up their fan base again as well. Williams have, but I imagine that's probably dwindled a little bit in recent years, with obviously how their performance has started to dwindle over the time. And Haas don't really have it with there, but Force India, Racing Point, they've always kind of overachieved. Even back in the days of Jordan, they've probably kind of get some of that fans back. And with Aston Martin being such a kind of classic manufacturer and classic motorsport name, it's really going to be exciting to see what they can drive forward with it.
I think so, and if we remember back to 2014 when we had the big engine regulation change, we were all saying all Mercedes are going to be at the front, obviously, because they've been working on that project for years, and we all expected that. But what we didn't expect was the likes of Williams and Force India to shoot up the grid, because Williams were challenging Red Bull and sometimes even Mercedes on a regular basis, which was great to see. And Force India were up there too. Sergio Perez, I think, got a podium in Bahrain 2014. And Hulkenberg picked up a lot of early points in that season. I think was third in the championship come race 4 or something, with how many points he managed to pick up. So it's always good to see the underdogs, like in 2014, Williams and Force India, doing actually a really good job on the regulation change, and it's always just so unpredictable. I mean, we had Sauber drop way down the grid in 2014 from where they were challenging for best of the rest in 2013, and Toro Rosso, they went up a little bit, and Ferrari obviously went down quite a bit. So it's always unpredictable regulation changes, and you can sort of speculate and sort of say, oh yeah, I don't expect really Force India or Williams to be at the top, but you just don't know until the season gets underway, really.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to curse it here by what I'm about to say, but historically in F1, whenever regulation changes have kind of come in, it has meant that there is kind of a mixed match and maybe a surprise, obviously from McLaren dominating in the late 80s to then, Williams innovation, meaning that they dominated pretty much the 90s, to the late 90s. Obviously, McLaren came out on top there. Ferrari in the early 2000s going on top. Then you suddenly got, Red Bull. No one would have ever seen Red Bull coming and dominating. And yes, they kind of would have predicted with how much they were working on that engine, Mercedes to do well. But I don't think anyone would have expected Mercedes to kind of do as well as they have done and kind of capitalised on this dominance through there. So it usually does throw in a new team and stuff. And it could easily be Aston Martin Racing. I know we've probably spent a lot of time focused talking on them, but I do genuinely, them and McLaren for me are probably the best placed teams to take advantage in this period.
I think so, and if we remember back, I think to 2008, when at the end of the 2008 season we had the regulation change in 2009, the order completely mixed. McLaren and Ferrari were right near the bottom of the grid for the first half of the season. We had Brawn at the top on a deal which where they brought out Honda at the last minute. No one expected Brawn to be nowhere near the top, and Red Bull obviously and Toyota are up there as well. So it does show there is unpredictability, but with those three teams, there was that certainty at the point that they had the resources in place to take them to the top. And obviously with Brawn, it was a much bigger surprise at the time. But if you look at the teams like McLaren and Aston Martin, as you said, they do have those resources to take them to the top. They just need that click, really, sort of thing. And this regulation change could be what makes it happen.
Absolutely, and I think the only fear is, and I think there is a lot of positives that can come, but with anything changing, obviously teams are getting more used to regulations, and as it currently stands, we don't know what the racing's going to be like in the 2020 season, because it might have even been closer. It might have been closer at the top. It might have been even closer in the midfield, because bearing in mind 2019 was very close in the midfield. If we have the change up in rules of 2021, could we have 18 dominate again? And, just that teething problem of whether it not quite working out as planned, because obviously a lot of these ideas work well. Closer racing sounds brilliant, more subscribed parts, cheapening the cost for teams, so it makes it easier for them to compete in F1. With the salary cap sorry, not the salary cap, but the budget cap coming in at 175 mil. All these things sound good in principle, but the cars are going to be a little bit slower as well. Are we in danger of, with change to try and make things better, could it essentially initially make things worse?
Obviously, you've got the law of diminishing returns, and I think that's going to be something we'll see quite highlighted in 2020. Obviously, they'll reach a point where you can't make the car go faster anymore. It's as fast as it can be, no matter how many upgrades you put on the car. And other teams will play catch up and gain more, and they'll reach a point, obviously. But as has been said many times by Ross Brawn and Chase Carey and everyone involved in like the management of Formula One, there's a problem where those teams like Williams, AlphaTauri, Alfa Romeo, they just can't bridge that gap because they just don't have the resources required to bridge that gap. They know what they need to do, they just can't bridge it because they don't have the money in place. And obviously McLaren and Renault do have that money in place, and it hasn't just gone quite right for them yet. But with 2021, with a regulation change, I can sort of see one team getting it spot on correct and maybe one team not getting it right correct, and that's going to be the front and the back. But what they're hoping is, with this budget cap, the team who gets it spot on correct can't just go soaring away with it. It gives that chance for the team who haven't got it correct to think, okay, why did we get this wrong? And they can spend what they have left to try and fix it. And the front cars just can't soar away because they're limited by that 175 million.
Absolutely. And, you know, I kind of was saying it as devil's advocate, but I think F1 needed to make a change because it's not good for a brand to almost have just predictability. As soon as sport becomes predictable in terms of who wins, naturally it's difficult to garner support and to gain interest in that, because nobody really enjoys someone dominating. We can respect it, like huge respect for Mercedes, doing what they have done in this hybrid era, but no one can really say that it's the most exciting thing that it could happen by them doing it, in especially how they've done it since 2016. It's 2017, 18, 19 has pretty much been very comfortable championship wins for Mercedes. I think you're right with that kind of extortionate amount, especially Ferrari and Mercedes were pumping into the sport. The other teams just can't compete, and if you've got so much money, just by probably law of averages, you're going to get it right. And if you get it wrong, you can fix it a lot quicker. Then the margin for error is a lot smaller. And, it's a lot more high pressure environment for the Haas, for the Alfa Romeo Saubers, for the, Racing Points, McLarens even, even though McLaren have a really good budget compared to their midfield competitors, it's still, nothing on the scale of, especially the two big boys in the front. And Red Bull are kind of that awkward middle ground, aren't they? They're better than the midfield, but they're not quite good enough to compete budget-wise with Mercedes and Ferrari.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if we remember back to 2013 when Red Bull had won their 4 world titles in a row, Red Bull were the clear number one. At that time, they had all the resources in place. And I remember, I think it was at the end of 2013, Vettel won 9 races in a row, which is massively respectable. But you sort of went into each race weekend at that point knowing, it's going to be, I think people were labelling it as the Vettel show, really, at that point, because you knew Vettel was going to win. Probably Mark Webber second and Alonso third, or maybe Grosjean or Raikkonen or something. But what's really good to see is sort of how the dynamics sort of changed a bit. Obviously, now we're sort of seeing Hamilton, Bottas, Verstappen, Vettel and Leclerc fighting for the wins, and not just Vettel all the time. Obviously, that's really good. But at the moment, it's sort of reaching a bit of a stalemate where it's only those 5. And I think I saw a stat on Formula One's Twitter yesterday, I think it was, saying the last time a Mercedes, Ferrari or Red Bull didn't win a race was Kimi Raikkonen back in Australia 2013, which is about 7 years ago, which is crazy to think. So this change is needed to make sure we have more unpredictability when racing, and I think it's going to be exciting to see.
Absolutely, and yeah, it is a change that needed to happen, and if it doesn't work, I can't blame F1 here, because this isn't a kind of rash decision making process. They've pretty much been planning this for 7 years, these kind of rule changes. They've done extensive research. They've really thought about how they can substantially improve. Liberty Media have come in and kind of really driven this forward in terms of that change, and I think they have been a refreshing uplift to F1 in trying to take it forward. Probably the last point before we'll go and talk on about, what the coronavirus has kind of absolutely thrown everything up in the air. But in terms of, for me, it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on this, Anthony. For me, as much as it is good to make it closer racing, I think the real thing we need to be careful of in 2021 and the kind of implementations it kind of puts in place is we don't make Formula One a spec series, because it's one of its unique things, and it has always been, for me, man and machine pushing the boundaries of what can do. And I think it's really important to keep that kind of integral to the heart of F1, that, a lot more kind of parts were being standardized in Formula One, more so than ever before, I believe. What are your thoughts on it, getting too close to a spec series?
I agree. I personally think, obviously, we can't go down the route of Formula One just copying off other series and whatnot and becoming a specification series. It's important Formula One keeps its, how should I say, sort of like uniqueness in the way it keeps what makes Formula One. It keeps what makes Formula One pretty much, if that makes sense. It's all about man and machine, obviously, and who can make innovation, but there has to be a point where it's not taken too far that it becomes unattractive and unappealing for other teams, new teams, to compete anymore. And if you look at spec series nowadays, you've got a lot more than 20 cars in most of them, and that's because mainly it's an appealing option for those teams to join the spec series. And if you look at Formula One at the moment, there is a bit more attractiveness with this budget cap, but at the moment we haven't really had any new teams since Haas joined in 2016, because it's not really an attractive option for teams at the moment, because they know they won't be able to fight for wins at the top in 2020. At this stage they'll be fighting either in the midfield or Williams or whoever's at the back of the grid, really. So
yeah, it's the exposure more in Formula One, isn't it? Obviously, Formula E is going from strength to strength, and that is a spec series. And that is very much for the manufacturers. Obviously, the future is probably electric. You never know what type of kind of rules and kind of ways of powering cars come in the future. But certainly Formula E are doing that, and that is the way that manufacturers are feeling. So obviously that's more appealing, and that their focus is it's a driver series. I think, why F1 is unique is because it is a driver series. You do have absolutely superb drivers competing there in the world, but also you have the best mechanical minds working to kind of really improve, and those things do filter down all the way into road cars, essentially. Obviously, Formula E are kind of stealing that thunder a bit, I think, more because of the way the electric's going and less petrol car. But F1 always adapts and always finds a way, engineering. And we've got to make it cheap, and we want the closer racing, but also I think, Ross Brawn was saying it in the interview at the time of the press conference back in October. He's like, he wants it rather than to be 2 seconds a gap in terms of the engineering brilliance, which, you know, you could probably really afford in like the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, even bits of the early 2000s, because of the reliability issues that used to happen. But because everything's become more efficient and Mercedes have really made everything so much more reliable, especially over the past few years, you know, it's very much, can it be 0.2 of a second rather than 2 seconds splitting, but still allowing them to kind of find that little percentage in engineering brilliance, with obviously the more focus on ground effect where we spoke earlier on that. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
I think so, yeah. I mean, it's important to make sure we have there's not 2 second gaps, because if we had like 2 second gaps between, let's say, Mercedes and Ferrari, you'd say Mercedes would win every race and then Ferrari would be playing Mickey Mouse at the back of the grid, which is not, if we remember back to 2010 when we had the 3 new teams, HRT, Virgin and Lotus, which would become Caterham. I remember the front, I think it was 9 of the teams at the front were within like a second and a half of each other, and then you had like a 2 second gap back to those 3 teams, and then at the end of the day it just became unsustainable for them to race. But it's about that combination of keeping the field close to each other but keeping the ingenuity and innovation of Formula 1, and not making it so all the teams are equal no matter what they do. Let's say Mercedes came with the new DAS steering wheel, let's say Mercedes came up with that innovation, which is their idea, it's great, but if then the FIA would say, okay, Mercedes made it, now you must supply all the other teams with it, or whatever, that's not what F1's all about. It's about teams coming up with ideas, but the problem with like Racing Point and a lot of the other teams, they have these ideas, they just can't implement them because they don't have the resources and funds available. Hoping with 2021 all these teams can come up with this innovation and ingenuity and ideas and actually implement them, and hopefully we'll get a closer field that way.
I think that's actually a really good point, because, you know, obviously the guys like Mercedes, Ferrari and Red Bull, they have the top talent in the game that have really helped them kind of excel. But, you know, if it's more of a level playing field in the performance budget, then, you know, those guys aren't the only ones who can be technically innovative within Formula 1. I'm sure there are, you know, loads of kind of great mechanical minds out there, and guys who aren't even in F1 yet. Guys who are, you know, maybe studying at university or maybe doing apprenticeships coming up through, that, you know, maybe in 3, 4, 5 years they might be the next big thing in terms of what they are able to bring to it. But, you know, yeah, like you said, it's now a more, with hopefully this cap, an even playing field for them to implement those ideas and really kind of find the advantage for their team.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's what F1's all about. It's just ideas and innovation, but making sure it just doesn't go too far and one team can pull away and dominate the sport for years and years and years. I think it's important to keep that aspect of Formula 1, make sure it's all about the teams, they get the right people in, because obviously, let's say you wanted to create an F1 team and you just got random people off the street, and that it wouldn't work if F1 was to say, okay, obviously let's take the Mercedes DAS wheel again and say, okay, Mercedes made this dual axis steering system, now you must supply it to all the other teams. I mean, that team who got everyone off the streets, they're not really going to come up with many ideas because they just don't have the knowledge, they don't have the background knowledge, unless you get lucky and every single person you pick has a degree, engineering degree or whatever. I mean, you could get lucky like that, but obviously it's important to keep that aspect of Formula 1. You can't just have teams joining for the sake of it and they don't really know what they're doing. It's important to keep that what's the word I'm looking for, sort of uniqueness.
Yeah. It's uniqueness and ingenuity, really, with kind of ideas. But yeah, I think that's kind of a very good discussion and roundup of the 2021 rules and kind of our hopes and dreams, and the real kind of hope that it can make a real significant and positive impact on the sport that we love. But obviously, these rules, the press conference and everything was kind of agreed. I think, there were still kind of some of the fine details to iron out, but everything was set for 2021. Coronavirus has come in, COVID-19, and it has thrown the whole world into absolute chaos. And as we record this, we don't know, but by the time this comes out, well, it'll be almost in a week for us from recording. It could very much well be confirmed, because it is in talks at the moment, of whether that the rules and regulations will be pushed back to 2022. So what are your thoughts on the potential of these changes being pushed back to 2022?
I think it's quite likely. I mean, at the moment with COVID-19, obviously the season's been delayed until it's believed to be the end of May, beginning of June, possibly. We're maybe looking at Monaco or Baku being the first race of the season. But I believe it hasn't been confirmed by F1, but a lot of high-level sources, that the summer break is taking place now. And during what would have been the summer break, so in July, August time, we're going to have a lot of the races we missed. And I'm not sure how they're going to structure the calendar for this year. We'll see, hopefully, in due course. I mean, I think the Vietnam circuits not long ago has just released a statement hoping they'll be able to announce the new date for the race this year, assuming COVID-19 calms down and we're in a much better situation for their race to take place in 2020. But at the end of the day, it'll be a much more compact season if we assume the summer break is taking place now. We're going to have probably a race every second weekend or every weekend if we get all 21 in. I doubt we'll get all 21 in. We're maybe looking at 17, 18 or 19. 19 possibly is maybe a bit much, but what it's going to do this season, it's going to mean greater business costs, because you're going to have a period where you're going to have all 18 races at one time, and that's going to cost teams like, I think, mainly Williams, who don't have all the backing in the world, Haas, you could say Renault maybe as well. I mean, there's a bit of debate if they're remaining at F1 next year or not. So I think the teams are pushing to push this back a year, really, because they want to make it so they can actually survive out this year, sort themselves out for 2021 if that's a year of stability, and really go hard for it in 2022.
Yeah, I think, more and more as this develops situation, I think actually Monaco, Spain and Zandvoort have been, I think it was confirmed, I think I read something before coming on, that it's been pushed to August. Those races will be rearranged for, and yeah, it's massively important for Hanoi. But like you said, the summer break has been introduced now. The factories are in lockdown, I believe, and it will be continuous through the season, which means continuous development. There is no break. There is no kind of real chance to kind of when to shift focus. I believe we spoke just a little bit before recording in terms of, I'm convinced it was Mercedes and it was definitely Red Bull, I felt, that wanted to suspend the rules being introduced to 2021 anyway, to 2022. So it feels very likely, and in this current climate, and with this season's going to be, hopefully we do get some racing and we do get a kind of a great season, although be interesting. It is going to be absolute chaos and carnage, and like you said, the calendar, we don't know whether it's going to pretty much just be like back to back races, which will take their toll on teams. And yeah, 2021 maybe need a refresh, another set with these rules, and it may even be really close. So as fans, we won't really be disappointed. But like you said, making sure we nail these rules and giving the teams the best possible opportunity to have the best platform to nail these rules, it would probably be the smartest choice to push it back to 2022.
I think so. I mean, we're looking at a situation where possibly in 2020, if we do get some racing, because the season's so compact, if one team gets it wrong and they realise, oh, we haven't got quite as good as a car as we thought, there's not that period in the summer break where they can really try and fix the problems. I mean, I'm thinking back to Force India in 2016. I remember that the car in the first half of the season was absolutely nowhere. It was fighting with the likes of Sauber and McLaren towards the back of the field. But after that summer break, they were right up there with Williams, Red Bull on occasion. And I mean, Sergio Perez got his podium in Russia 2016. So it does show, I think, if this season, if one team gets it wrong, it's going to be a long, hard season for them, and they need that 2021 season to sort it out and try and get back to a place where they know they're safe, really. Because if you look at a team like Williams, for example, with this compact season, if they have another 2019 where they're 3 seconds off the pace and a second back from the next car in front, another season like that with no real time for development and whatnot, it's going to be a real hard slog, and you've got to question whether they make it to 2022 if the regulation changes happen then. So it'll be really interesting to see, I think, what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think probably a key quote from me was from Ross Brawn, and this was in relation to another topic we discussed back a while ago on the channel, which was new teams coming into Formula One. And obviously Ross Brawn, I think, said, it's really key for F1 to have 10 stable teams, and if new teams come into the sport, they've really got to add to the product. Like you've mentioned earlier, we can't have the state with the 3 new teams coming in where they were there, but they weren't really in F1, were they? They were in their own Formula 1.5, 1.75, whatever you want to call it. They just weren't really in the picture at all. So if you rushed these rules in what could be a chaotic year, like the whole world is going to suffer economically during this period, and getting 2021 right would be too much of a sacrifice, too much of a risk, and there's almost so much hype around it. I think people would be a lot happier to stomach, I think you said it to me pre-recording, I'd rather wait a year and make sure we get fantastic racing in 2022, or the best chance of fantastic racing in 2022, rather than having okay racing in 2021 just because we wanted to rush the new rules through.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I did say that to you pre-recording, but I remember at the time when the 3 new teams came in, they were promised before they signed the contract to entry that a budget cap would be coming in, I believe, for the 2011 or 2012 season, and that never materialised because a lot of the rule changes at that time were rushed. And I remember, I think it was Lotus or in the future going to be Caterham, they were told when they signed the agreement, okay, we're going to have a budget cap in 2011, and when that never really materialised, they had only 5 months to build the car, so it was a complete rush, and obviously they were absolutely nowhere, because sure, it was a fantastic effort, they could build their car in 5 months, but 5 months is not long enough to make a car that can really fight for wins or whatever on that sort of on that level, really. But what I think it sort of like this whole COVID-19 situation and coronavirus, I think this whole idea of teams being stable or not, maybe we'll get some new entrants possibly, it's all going to come down to economic stability, as you said, and the possibility of a recession maybe happening, a recession we haven't had really since 2008 with the financial crisis and housing markets and whatnot at that time. And we're looking at, if there is a recession, we've got to question, can some teams stay on the grid? I know there was an interview or press release with Lawrence Stroll saying he's putting more money now into Aston Martin to try and provide more confidence, because once this COVID-19 situation hit, their shares and stock market has gone down even further than when Lawrence Stroll brought it. So hopefully what I think the teams want is to push these rules back to 2022, because if there is maybe a recession this year, they'll have that time in 2021 to sort out all the problems they've had, and if they're still having problems, if the rule changes were brought in 2021, they might not get it right, and that might be the end of racing for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we won't know the full effect of what this virus has had on the world. Obviously, the immediate crisis right now is on people's health and trying to keep, people as health and safe as possible. But, I don't think we're going to really understand the financial implications of what it's had on the world really into a bit. And if F1 for me have been running themselves better and been making better decisions in recent times. So that's why to me it does naturally seem right to push it to 2022 in adjusting to the circumstances that have been thrown. Obviously the plan was 2021, but you've got to adapt. Nobody saw this coming. Nobody saw it kind of having the global impact that it's had on the entire world. We've got to be sensible here. At the end of the day, racing is an entertainment. It's something enjoyable. They are businesses, admittedly so, but there are people's livelihoods and stuff. We can't just rush things and potentially send people under. If we've got to give a bit more time to allow people to stabilise, realise where they are, and kind of get the pursuit of things right, we've absolutely 100% got to do that.
I think so. Yeah, in this, no one knows what's going to happen in this period. I mean, if you look at China now, imagine you plotted the coronavirus on a line chart or whatever. You could sort of say China's rapidly going down now, and it's much safer there now. But here in the UK and Spain and France and Portugal, it's just hitting that peak now, or beginning to undergo that rise. So no one really knows what's going to happen, because in different countries it's obviously going to have different effects. I mean, at the moment here in the UK, it's changing on a daily basis. I mean, yesterday we had schools closed, then we had announcements about please work from home, and then it's just changing every day. So it's a lot of uncertainty, and I think it's really good in a way we're having the summer break now, so teams can just stay away from development and all that sort of thing, and just focus on the summer break and not having all that uncertainty. And hopefully it might have calmed down a bit by the end of the summer break, and hopefully when everyone's a lot healthier and it's much safer place, because obviously health and safety is number one priority. As we saw at the Australian Grand Prix, it was a little bit of chaos the night before. No one knew what was happening, but health and safety had to take first priority, and the race didn't go ahead. And we've had China and Bahrain and Vietnam cancelled. It looks like the Netherlands is being pushed back as well. So obviously it's a rapidly developing situation, and we just have to get through the summer break. Hopefully it's all calmed down by then, and see what happens.
Absolutely, and that is all we can do. But I think that's probably a good point to round off this podcast, and it's been massively enjoyable with you, Anthony. Do you have any final thoughts on the prospect? We'd say 2021, but with the likelihood that it will probably be in 2022. What is your final thoughts on the kind of new rule changes and the implementation whenever they come into play?
I think there are three main points. Closer racing. So there's no predictability. You can say, Mercedes are going to win almost every race this season. We need a situation where, as we said, 5 or 6 cars can fight at the front of the grid, and we think, let's say Hamilton's qualified on pole, but you could say the guy in 9th place could still win the race. You just don't know. So I think that's number one. Number two is more sustainability for teams in the future. So that's through the cost cap, obviously, and making sure teams are on a more level playing field. And obviously that's not scrapping innovation and ingenuity. It's keeping that involved in the sport and not making it a spec series like we discussed, but making sure it's not an unattractive option for new teams and current teams to be in Formula One. And I think the third point, it's just gone out it's gone in one ear and gone out the other.
Lost for words.
It'll come to me.
I think very good points in terms of, I'll try and fill in, and hopefully you'll have a eureka moment and your third point will come. But I think for me the important thing of this is, like we discussed, there needed to be a change. We can't have this kind of dominance there, and for me it's been a serious look at the sport. It isn't a rush decision. They're looking to make a significant change for the positive, and I think I said it around about the time when I made a video on the rules, when it all came out. They're trying, and it may not be perfect straight away, but at least they are trying to improve things in Formula 1. And all the data looks good, everything looks good on paper, so we can only hope that that translates to on-track performance.
I think so, yeah. I've just sort of remembered what my last point was going to be. It's just popped into my head now. There needs to be sort of that certainty for teams to know they're going to be racing. Sort of like if we have a more equal playing field, as we sort of said, like with the cost cap, teams who are closer to the front and not always running around at the back, like Williams, there's a lot of uncertainty at the moment. No one really knows. If they can bridge that gap and be in the midfield, we sort of know they'll be there next year, and it's making it obviously more attractive for new teams to come in and know. Just at the back, like those 3 new teams, we were uncertain every year. Are they going to be here next year? And HRT went, and then Caterham went, and we lost Manor as well. So it's providing that certainty and stability really for teams and making it an attractive option.
Yeah, absolutely, and that is absolutely huge for F1. Because we need strong teams, we need a strong competitive field, and we need the security just on a kind of a human front of giving people stability in their jobs. In terms of nobody, it's F1, we often see the 2 drivers within a team and, maybe the team principal. But, there are thousands of members of staff working on these teams. And, it really is a group and team effort to make a whole F1 team function. So, yeah, we need greater stability, certainly on that front. But, Anthony, it's been a fantastic chat. I've really enjoyed this. Again, it's brilliant having another F1 fan. I mean, we both share a passion, and that is F1. And whenever we get to talk about something, it is easy just to kind of have a chat about these things and see where it ends up. And it's been a very enjoyable chat. I hope you've enjoyed your time on the kind of podcast today. So yeah, thank you very much for coming on, Anthony.
It's great to be here. Thank you very much for having me on.
No problem at all. And guys, if you are a fan like Anthony and you're listening and due at one, obviously in this corona break that we've got, we will obviously have more slots and more kind of F1 worldwide than we would have done during this period, because there is no F1 to necessarily have at the moment. So make sure you get in contact on Twitter, probably is the best chance, in the DMs, and just, yeah, like Anthony did, we'll sit down, we'll organise, we'll find a date, and we'll have a great chat about F1. But Anthony, you've been a absolutely brilliant guest. And guys, if you are new around here or you haven't done so already, don't forget you can subscribe to the channel to keep up to with more content just like this one. And yeah, comment down below with your thoughts on 2021, what you think the impact's going to have on the sport. Do you think it will be pushed back to 22? And what's the thing that kind of really excites you most about? Because there is a lot of excitement to be had, I think, with these rule changes coming in. But for now, you F1 fans, keep racing.